Now we're going to policy discourse. We will be considering the federal government plans of 100,000 housing units for vulnerable persons across 774 local government areas and 6 investors for this purpose. And if we look at it properly, we could see that the Minister of Housing and Urban Development, Architect Ames Musa Dangiwa, disclosed this on January 29, 2025 during his presentation at the 4th edition of Real Estate Future Forum in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. According to a statement on the ministry's website, the initiative will be implemented through a comprehensive nationwide social housing delivery programs aimed at expanding housing access for low-income earners and vulnerable population in Nigeria. Whilst this is a welcome development, of course, economically, this within the perspective of development, and of course, business, because it's going to create not just employment opportunities for builders and also bring development to the real estate sector in Nigeria, but we begin to think 100,000 housing units, situated and located in different aspects or in different places in Nigeria, what it will attract, and if it was going to really solve or bring some form of respite to the housing deficiency in Nigeria. Look at it from the business, from the economic, and from the development lens, right here on the front burners. Doctor.
Well, I think there are a lot of issues that confront us as a people. We have serious and huge housing deficit in Nigeria, and trying to intervene is one thing. But you see, I think one big challenge that faces us as a people is that we have to talk about something that should not really make headline news. We have the Ministry of Housing. At a certain level, I was talking with a friend of mine, and I think before this inflation in 2023 or 2022, and what he told me was the fact that minus land, if you have 4 million, you could build a 2-bedroom apartment. So, if we to take that conversation a little further, since land belongs to the government, maybe if we have a 10 million, or today a 50 million naira, we can build comfortably a 3-bedroom flat, minus the cost of land. And if government is sincere, and all these social intervention things we are doing, we could make more houses for these vulnerable people than the number that we are talking about. So we don't need 200 million to build one house. So if you build a 2-bedroom flat, can take a family of 4, or a 3-bedroom flat for a family of 4 or 5, as the case may be. And then we can put this and factor them in the budget consistently. You'll find that we will be able to address the housing deficit in Nigeria that is put about 28 million units.
Okay, lesson.
Yes, 28 million housing deficits in Nigeria, it's a lot. But I agree with the Minister for Housing and Urban Development in his statement that this is not a problem, it's an opportunity. But again, it depends on how we approach it. If we don't approach it rightly, it will be a problem. If we approach it rightly, then it becomes an opportunity for investors in real estate, because real estate is a very big business. So if there is 28 million housing deficit, it means as a business person or as a real estate investor, you have a huge market for what you're offering. How do you offer or what you're offering then becomes the case. Now, this is to provide low-cost housing for vulnerable people in 774 local governments of Nigeria. That's a lot. And the government plans to start with 100,000. Yes, that's still some number. If you spread it around the 774 local governments, maybe some local governments will get 5,000, some will get, depending on what gets to them. That is still a relief. But I think too, part of the issue is the kind of housing or houses that we're building. We're used to this type of houses built with cement and all of that. It makes it very expensive. Now, if we're talking about housing for vulnerable people, I think there should be some creativity. Are there ways, are there methods, is there technology that can be used to provide low-cost housing? That should be the first question. Now, if there are technologies, there are methods, there are materials that can be used to provide low-cost housing for people, can we explore that? Will it cost less than the kind of block, brick, cement kind of houses that we're building? If we can do that, then fine. Now to the issue of land. There are so many reasons why land has become so expensive. So many settlements here and there. And if some of these things are handled, then it might make land easy for people. And then if you're providing housing for people, under what scheme are you going to provide this housing? Will the people need to make some form of contribution? Is it going to be like a 50-50 partnership for people so that government will say, oh, if we can't build a house and just give it to you? Are we going to ensure that there's a scheme? Do we have an operational mortgage system that is available to the vulnerable where they can access loans to build their houses and they have a period of time to repay back? All of this needs to work hand in hand. The federal mortgage system needs to be funded so that a lot of people can have access to loans to build. Some persons have lands they've inherited, so for them, land is not the issue, but they need funds to build. Some don't have and would like to own. Now, if you are a civil servant, are we working out a plan that helps you own a land? If you're not even under government employment, is there a plan to help you access land and then you pay in installments? So I think this plan should be laid out in a way that helps the vulnerable people key in, because government on their own may not be able to take on what it would entail in terms of the financial implication to handle this. So at what point do the private investors come in? Do the real estate investors come in? Now, are you waiving aside certain fees, maybe like that of C of O's, so that they now know that, okay, whatever these fees have been waived away from us. So whatever we are providing, if we would have given out the house at maybe 20 million naira, we can now give it out at 15 million naira, or we will be able to allow payment in installments. So there are different considerations that I think need to come into this for this plan to really work, and maybe they may just be able to expand beyond 100,000 that the government planned to do.
You see, the problem.
Doc,
wait, just 1 minute.
Okay.
The problem with the announcement is the fact that this house is meant for the vulnerable. You need to define who these vulnerable are.
That's where I was going.
We need to define who the vulnerables are. And you are asking investors to put money on the ground.
That's what I'm asking.
For the low-income.
That's what I'm saying.
To build houses for the vulnerable.
This should be well planned. If you are waiving certain fees off, is this something they can do?
It's not about fee.
Is this something
it's
they
not
can
just
do?
About fee.
That if these vulnerable people are defined, is this that they have some form of earning? Is there a plan they can come on?
That is the question. See, if you're talking about civil servants, all civil servants are in federal mortgage scheme. Government is deducting their money, and government has not been able to build houses for them. Almost all of our civil servants, they have been collecting their money since they step into civil service. And that money gets into federal mortgage bank.
Housing allowance.
And that money has not been able to build one house. So let's remove civil service and low income earner from it. that already have a structure on the ground done by government, and we can't point to houses that's okay in Lagos. Federal Mortgage Bank has built this number of houses for civil servants who are retired from Lagos State. We don't have it. Number two, when you're looking at people who are vulnerable, you're looking at people maybe who live in the rural areas where I don't have access, and you are asking me to come and put my money on investment.
Isn't there a plan? Isn't there a plan that could work?
No.
Them into a
it can't work. It can't work.
We can't say it can't work.
It
we need to explore how it
you
would work.
know, it cannot work, because if you are asking an investor to come put money to build a house for an individual, so we are not even thinking that government is funding it. You are saying, me, who is a private business person, I'm going to build a house for somebody, for example, who is in an IDP camp and has no means of livelihood. Who's going to do the payment?
That's what we're talking about.
So when you are thinking, what I'm thinking and what I feel could work, government has a lot of social interventions. All this money they are transferring to people, 25,000. If we plan it very well over a period of 10, 20 years, you'll find that you will be able to deliver social houses to people. Because we have Ministry of Works and Housing, for example.
Can I ask a question? Let me ask the question.
Okay.
These vulnerable people, if government builds the house, are they going to come into the house for free? Are they going to stay there for free?
Okay, no. Let me come in here. Let me come in here. Just a moment, Doc. Now, from what you look at when we talk about these housings and the buildings, and government is not going to get it to give to anyone for free.
So it means that they are going to make some contribution.
There are places where this happens.
It's not giving. It's not giving out.
Do we have that capacity?
We have.
Nigeria.
We can. You see, what you mean is that you think people who even retired, who were citizens or had a green passport of the United Kingdom, they live like that at a certain level. When they get to 60, they go to UK to go apply for a council house. That council house is free. Government even send workers, social workers, to come do there. Government come to deliver food for them. So it is possible. Don't say it's not possible. You see, when you are dealing with vulnerable individuals, we are looking at something you can do. Take a period, and you say all this money we are throwing at poverty that really are not working, we can actually use it in such a way we can use it to develop even these same council houses. And let's build one house in a council in a year. When we get to 20 years, we'll have 20 houses.
Okay, now, I was asking, now if these houses are not going to be given to them for free, it means that the vulnerable people are going to make some form of payment or going to contribute to it. If they can contribute, it means that private investors can also come in. But at what level they come in is what needs to be determined.
Federal government or the government is not going to just go and build this house. Of course, it's going to give it to private investors who are going to build a house. There will be a contract to define the terms. Now, we have seen state governments who build houses for people in the state, some of which some of the state civil service enjoy. But the thing is, they say we're building houses for low-income earners, and you're expected to pay between 50 and 100 million naira for, let's say, about 10 years or 7 years. Can we really classify or categorize those people as low-income earners? Because
big-income earners.
They are not, because it's running to hundreds of millions of naira. And like Doc said, private investors would not want to step their foot
so
there.
There are different
so now, let's even talk about what is happening in Canada. In Canada, when you work, when you have not been confirmed in your place of work as a full-blown staff, they see you as a part-time staff. They said, okay, yeah, you're a part-time staff. The mortgage institutions are not allowed to give you, to support you with mortgage loan. You can't buy houses. Those kind of staff is what we call the contract staff here in Nigeria, that you cannot buy. However, within a specific period of time, when you're working and you become a full staff of the organization you're working for, then you are qualified, because the government, there is a system in place where the government is monitoring the incomes, and not just that, you are paying taxes. The tax of the people works for the government. because the government is so hell-bent in making sure they collect your tax, and through that tax system, they are even giving people back money and loans to spend through the credit card means. And you must be in your right senses to make sure you have a good track record in operating and using your credit card. When you become a full staff of the organization, irrespective of how much you earn, of course, which the government will have a threshold that they cannot go below, then you can now borrow or get money from the mortgage institutions to buy a house and pay for a specified period of time. When the government of our countries, and probably in Africa, when they plan for houses and for low-income earners, in that particular case where investors who don't want to step into what I call the mud, what are the systems they put in place? Doc, the mortgage system in Nigeria, do you think it's still working or it has become moribund?
Yeah, mortgage will work for an environment where people have living wages. The challenge here is we don't even have the middle class because that has been wiped out by inflation and the rest of it. So you have the super rich who don't need mortgage, or if they need capital loan and they can build their houses and then they are living in it. And of course, you also have developers who you want to come into your environment to build houses, and then of course these houses have to be letted. So these are the issues with mortgage. Developers can have access to mortgage, but you have them build houses, but these houses are not accessible to the poor, and they can site these houses in rural communities because the poor will not be able to afford it. See, this is where, for me, the Ministry of Housing would have become useful. But for me, because every time I sit down, even at my level, I'm thinking, what's really the need for a Ministry of Housing? Having over 1,000 staff, doing what? What's their job role? We just use it to create bureaucracy. And so when you look at it and see how much money that is voted to the Ministry of Housing on a yearly budget, if we have no that in and we give it to somebody else and say, go construct houses, we'll build houses for everybody. But this is where I am worried that when we are thinking about something that is going to happen, and I thank God that this was said at Rumia, said somewhere in Saudi Arabia, we should also be looking at the workability of things that we are putting in place. You talk about even in Lagos where you have houses for civil servants. The civil servants, those who are grade level 12 to 15, can't even afford those houses. They cannot afford it because their salary can't carry it. So at the end of the day, you think that this person is having like 20 years to serve or has maybe 10 years left in service and is looking for an accommodation. How much are you going to be taking away from his salary that is less than 2 million in a year, and then we'll be able to pay for that house in the so you see that government is doing this as a social service.
Okay, this statement was made, or this announcement was made outside of Nigeria. It was made in I think in Riyadh. Yes, so the minister wasn't even talking to Nigerians there. He was talking to people he considers as potential investors in the real estate sector. Now, if there wasn't a possibility of the private sector coming into play here, I don't think he would be making that statement there, except he was saying that he didn't know what he was saying. He was just talking or making a political statement to say, oh, this is an opportunity for you. It's not a problem, but you can come in and invest. So this is it. We have more housing deficit in the urban areas than in the rural areas because of the influx of people to the urban areas. Now, if we have more housing deficit in the rural areas, it means that the concentration of housing development is in the urban area than in the rural areas. So when you have these people who are vulnerable, even though we haven't defined or the government hasn't exactly defined for us who are vulnerable, but we know who a vulnerable person is. People who are disadvantaged socially and even financially because of their status. So, Doctor has even provided one solution to it. You are giving social support. You're giving stipends to people. Have you identified, taken the data of the people who are vulnerable within a particular area? Do you have their information? Can you bring them into association Do you have some way of empowering them to say, okay, you are not just going to be dashing you or giving you free money. This is what you're going to be doing and you're going to be on this stipend. But this is what we're doing. We're going to be putting out a certain part of this money. Or the stipend they even give to people to say, we have your data, we have your information, but we're not going to give you this money because if we give it to you, you may spend it. We're going to be putting it aside for this purpose. Those investors that the minister is trying to woo into the country, when they come, what are the incentives that you're giving to them that reduces the cost they will put into developing housing
land
for vulnerable? Are you giving them land for free to say, we don't want to give the people the land, but we're giving you this area for you to build? Now, coming to the building materials, are there materials that can be used today to provide shelter that is good enough for a human being to live, that is decent enough, that perhaps is not as expensive as the type of housing materials that we're using? If you go to other parts of the world, they build houses using different materials, not just cement, block, and all that we would do here. Is it less expensive? Are we considering, do you have the technology to build for these people where they can stay? Not the one that wind blows and then they're out of the place, but it can be less. So what other incentive are you bringing? Now, what is the plan you have to ensure that these people come into a fold where they can make little contributions for a very long period of time if that housing is not going to be given to them for free? So if it's not going to be for free, that means they have some capacity, or the government wants to build a capacity for them to be able to afford it. That's what I'm saying. So at the end of the day, some houses can be delivered to these people and they make some contribution over a long period of time. Now, what that contribution will be is left for the government to determine, but there has to be a well-thought-out plan to make all of this work.
Okay.
Before
you come in, I need to iron something out.
No.
Before you come in. Now, she mentioned something very, very critical that we should put into consideration. And she talked about the government being able to bring these people, the low-income earners, either within its employment or through another means, as an association, to be able to get them some form of housing, which we feel the investors may not be able to shoulder a large part of it because they may not be able to recoup the money they will spend on it, and of course the profits they are going to make. Somewhere in Mowe Ibafo, you will see vast areas of land, and they're telling you this particular acre, it can be about maybe 150 acres of land. They are telling you a group of lecturers from the University of Lagos came together to purchase these acres of land. And as an association, they've marked out portions of land for each of themselves to come build houses for themselves because they do not have trust in the system to provide them housing when they retire. So, you know this talk about Nigerians paying for getting electricity, providing electricity for them, providing almost everything for them. It looks for themselves. It looks as if that's the direction we're going. Now, when these people work, they have monies that they call housing allowance and other allowances. And these monies are not just taken out and given to the mortgage banks. When it is stored in the mortgage or in the normal conventional banks, they are supposed to be doing businesses with this money for them to, make more money for profit and to be able to pay back when these people, civil servants, are retiring and leaving. Shouldn't there be a policy whereby when someone is going to retire from work, either in the public or in the private sector, that you are going to build a form of, depending on the size of house, whether it's a 3-bedroom flat or a 5-bedroom flat or in a duplex, where the government can pay 50% for you by way of the fact that you've been able to save throughout your life, or in the civil service, you have 35 years experience in the civil service, and you on your own part would have been able to fund the other 50 or 40%. Don't you think such policy will bring in some form of succor to Nigerians who will be leaving the public service or the private sector and they are retiring?
This is the point I'm making. There's something Blessing alluded to and said, this was made as an appeal to investors, somewhere to come. If you earn 250,000 today in public service in Nigeria. Should be around grade level 14 or 15. And that is $150 in a month.
So they're also vulnerable.
That's the point I'm making. It's not just enough for us to make statement. It's also put the practicality of the statement. Even if you are going to use bamboo to build a house, this will not solve it. It will not solve it. Because you're looking at the income of people. There are Nigerians who are still earning 30,000. There are Nigerians who are still earning 25,000, 20,000 monthly. How much are they going to aggregate? That's the point I'm making. Now, you talk about intervention or policy.
Yes.
There's a government policy, national housing policy, that established the Federal Mortgage Bank that is taking money from civil servant salary every month to build houses for them when they are retiring. The question is, how many houses have been delivered? And you see, what's the contribution? Because they can't take the whole of your salary. And so by the time you contribute over 30 years, it's not even able to buy zinc. So these are the challenge that the system faces. And that's why, you see, I said to people, nobody take a trumpet to call investors. To say, come and invest in my environment. Investors see conditions and they jump into the opportunity. Have we created that kind of opportunity? Is the question that I'm asking. So whether you are building the house in urban center, in short, yesterday evening when I was going for work, I went to check one house in my neighborhood, and I was telling the chairman of the LCDA that they said this house is 2 million. He was calling the man and said nobody will take this house, and they said this is why this house has been vacant for more than 4-5 weeks, and it could be there for some time. The house is not occupied. Even not in Nigeria alone. If you also go to the United Arab Emirates, the same thing, and you are seeing 7-8 people living in the same room because they cannot afford it. So when you talk about decline of property market in China and some other part of the world, this is the issue, because people can't afford the houses to pay the rent. For not even buy it, they can't even rent it. So it's a challenge in the environment because the economy is not supporting some of the policies that you are putting in place. So what I'm actually advocating is that what UK has done is a very beautiful model. Build houses so that those of your senior citizens who work and serve you, and now 60 years, they are living service, they don't have a house of their own. They can move into a council house and then live and die there. When they die, somebody else can take it over.
You know, this shelter system that the US also have. But the problem with having such a system here in Nigeria is maintenance. You even have some shelters around in some states, at least they have that under the Ministry of Women Affairs for children who are on the streets, to get them off the streets. But the problem when you talk to some of them, one of the first things they say to you is that, no, that place is either overcrowded, it's not maintained, and some of them prefer to even go back to the streets to where they were before. So if we have a working shelter system, that it is not provide house for Mr. Preye, provide house for Mr.
I will
Joseph.
build mine myself.
Okay, that's a good one. I'm just using that as an example.
Great.
So it's not say provide house for Mr. Preye, for instance, provide house for Mr. Joseph, provide housing. If you can have these vulnerable people, categorize them, because the level of vulnerability for one person differs to another. This person may be vulnerable in this area, but not as vulnerable as the other person because their earning power differs or their earnings differs. So if you provide that people can have maybe like a common room, instead of you having that commercial common room that takes more people than it should, you have the one, maybe a hostess setting, perhaps, for certain category of people. If you can provide that kind of housing, it's not their own. They pay. But what you are charging, because this is government provided or government funded, is way less than what they would pay in a commercially owned place. So that will provide some shelter for the people, because I think the major aim here is providing a roof over the heads of people.
Okay, very good. Now, let's take this conversation to another aspect where maybe the governing authorities not really taking consideration of this. 2 years ago, or if not, let's say about 3 years ago, we experienced flooding in Nigeria. It was devastating and bad. About 600,000 acres of land in the northern part of the country was washed away. The things that suffered, infrastructure that the government has built almost to complete stage, about 80% completed, was washed away by the flood. People's houses were swept away. Farmlands that crops were going to harvest in the northern part of the country was taken out. Now, let's bring insurgency into it. Insurgency has rendered a whole lot of people homeless. In fact, even in Lagos, you see people sleep on the streets and on the roads. Doc, there are buildings on the Lagos Island, skyscrapers, that are completely empty. Nobody lives there. On this Lagos Island, nobody lives there. It's not far. It's not far-fetched. No, that's the security. That's the security. Whoever is watching over the property. So people don't occupy this place. So people don't occupy these buildings, and they are just there for years. I have seen them. Someone took me there, and I saw it for myself. That good skyscrapers. Nobody lives there. So what are when we talk about the people living in IDP camps, some of them who were millionaires, who were living just in their own houses that were washed away, compensation. Both state government, federal government, through the arm of humanitarian affairs and disaster management, the ministry, and all of that. If we don't consider the thing of houses, we have lots of destitute people. Even in centers like Lagos, you look at under the bridge, people are sleeping there. How can we defeat this menace? Most especially from people who are doing well, and by way of natural disaster or by terrorism and banditry, they find themselves at the ebb of society, I would say at the dust again.
I just feel that to take strategic thinking by a forward-looking set of leaders to really develop our society. People are always looking at what immediately benefit them, and I think that's a problem. Yeah, those skyscrapers we talked about, if you go there, a lot of people are living there. Some people are collecting rent on behalf of the government. And then, of course, I'm telling you, and this is for real.
Yes, that's true.
And so they are taking rent and allowing other people to enter there. Some of them actually become den
for hideouts,
for robbers and all manners of criminality. So because they are abandoned and people really do not understand that these are wastes. But you're also looking at it, for example, if you want to convert some of these skyscrapers to livable apartments, it's going to cost a whole lot of money. And now who is going to even let them? And there are properties that are even privately owned that are unoccupied all across on the island here. And the reason is because the rent are beyond the rooftop and businesses cannot afford it. You can imagine that you are renting a square kilometer here on the island and it's about 3,000 naira. So,
naira?
Oh yes.
33,000 naira.
Per square kilometer. Per square meter. So if you live in 10 square meters, you know what that is for a rent. And then you pay service charge. So all these things put together make these houses really not profitable. They are not profitable. So what can we do? Is government also deliberately taking people away from the streets? And I think that's possible. if we reduce the size of our government and become leaner, we can convert the savings into critical investment, where, for example, we can remove these people from the streets and give them a livelihood by having farms where they have to work daily. They'll be paid daily to feed themselves, as they do in other parts of the world, where prisoners are not just let to remain inside the prison house. They are taken to factories, they are taken to farm. They work their money for their 3 square meal, and they have opportunity to make telephone. And government is making this provision, and they are contributing to the development of society. And I think those are the proactive steps that all tiers of government can take. So local government can start to have farms and have farmhouses and get these people engaged and give them a living. You create like a hub for them, and there's a school there, there's a mosque, there's a church, and then they can have real social life in that environment, and they become real productive human beings, rather than allow them to litter the street. State can take some of all this effort. Federal government can take some of all this effort. And then we create hub for production. And then, of course, we're not going to be import dependent, and would have solved the problem of hunger, solved the problem of housing, and also create wealth for the majority of people in the environment. It's not going to be done in one day, but if we are systematic about it and we are creative in thinking, it can be resolved.
Doc, what you said is laudable, because even when we say vulnerable people, are they physically challenged? Even you see persons who are physically challenged coming up with one thing or the other. They have been empowered, or some of them empower themselves, and they're gainfully employed in one venture or the other. So even when we talk about vulnerable people, there are still contributions that these people are making. That's what I'm talking about, bringing them into a fold. When you bring them into a fold, there you are better able to identify them and perhaps what they can be useful for. That would really work. But again, if we're talking about reducing the size of government, the people would not also make it easy for government to reduce its size, because everybody or every area wants representation. Now we have people in the House of Reps. Every constituency, even when it's time for election, you have certain area within the constituency saying it's our turn to go. So if they were even given the chance to divide certain constituencies so that they can have some representation, they would do that. We still see regions clamoring for additional states. And some states saying, no, we're supposed to have more than 18 local governments. We're supposed to have 20 local governments. So these are part of the problem. The people too are parts of government having more people than it necessarily needs on board.
Yeah, but you see, leadership is pathfinding. Not everybody is born to lead. Some people are just bound to follow, and they have the wherewithal to follow. So when you have a leader is to think for the majority of the people and say, this is where we are going. So what we have had is that you're having, for example, take for example Lagos, the city of Lagos. You go to the city of Kano, and you see non-state actors taking over the streets. And government agents there are not even able to have even sort of exact authority. So this is where you find yourself, and you are seeing that these people are taking taxes. I was coming to work yesterday. My car stopped at Oworosoki overheating. For me to just solve the problem of overheating, people came around me and said to me, I must pay them. And I said, for which work now? And they said, this is our chairman here. They have structures taking revenue on behalf of government. And in short, when we were talking, one last man came here and they were introducing me, and the last myself is calling the Maoga. You see, these are the kind of environment where we have found ourselves, and this is the real problem in our society, because the state government seems to be encouraging some of all these things. And if we are really determined to make the city work, we must be proactive in the way we solve problems.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's the conversation we're talking about, housing and development. If the government, I remember vividly during Fashola's time when he was in the cabinet of former President Muhammadu Buhari, it was during his administration that the Ministry of Works and Housing was separated into two, and it was given the Ministry of Works, and that of Housing was occupied by another cabinet member, by another person, a minister to that effect. So we expect that the Ministry of Housing would be doing better by now, by way of suggesting policy roadmaps for the government to improve upon and to provide efficient and sufficient houses for Nigeria in all strata of society.